Hey guys, so this is the third and final deck with my 3-3 colored series. This is a deck, it's a rather old deck. For whatever reason, I was going to talk about it this week, and, I think I hinted it last week that I wanted to talk about this one specifically, but for whatever reason, I've actually encountered it several times in the casual room, and this is, kind of an old list, and for whatever reason is all of a sudden popping up every now and then. So someone out there other than me is definitely seeing, how much fun this is and come across this somewhere and decided that they wanted to play it. So I'm not sure what that's all about, but this is my revamped version of the deck. There's not a lot of big changes. I had an older version of this deck that ran, some odd things, but I have made some changes. I talk about this deck a little bit more detail in the article on puremtgo.com if you want to go check that out. This is kind of evolved from, there was another deck out there called Kadama's Thunder, and they both basically resolve around cycling Resounding Thunder to do that 6 damage. So this one is called Tilling Thunder. I call this New Tilling Thunder, and it basically revolves around Tilling Treefolk, Cartographer, and this kind of great draw engine that you get off these cycling lands. And just using that cycling lands, bringing them back, and constantly going through this to build up your mana ramp that way. It's really interesting. You're not using a lot of ramp spells. I love this deck. It's a lot of fun. It loses in epic fashion, honestly, but it also wins in epic fashion. It's not always one of those middle ground decks where you hit that 50-50 mark, but it's definitely one of those things that when you win big, and when you lose, well, sometimes you lose big too. But let's check this out real quick. So you're running 4 copies of Cartographer and Tilling Treefolk. Now this is a very, very light creature deck. You're only running 14 creatures, and these are the main ones. You want to use these to bring back lands. Now it's 3 colors. You're running 4 Tranquil Thickets and 4 Forgotten Caves, and this is your draw engine. You're going to be able to play these, cycle them to draw cards, play Cartographer and Tilling Treefolk to bring them back, and cycle them again. And that's really the interaction that goes on here. That's the big appeal to this deck. There's other things you can bring back too. You can run the Terramorphics can come back to act as mana ramp. So whereas Terramorphic is kind of fetch and done, with Cartographer and Tilling Treefolk you can bring them back and use it continuously to get more lands. But they also have other uses, right? Now we are running 3 copies of Fire Blast. Fire Blast is a heavy costed spell for 4 damage, but it has this nice little addition that you can sacrifice 2 mountains instead of paying its cost. So you can sacrifice 2 mountains to deal 4 damage on Fire Blast and use these guys to bring those mountains back. Now we also have kind of a nice addition with that, with these Harvest Worms. Now Harvest Worm is a 3/2 creature for 2, but when he comes into the battlefield you have to sacrifice it unless you return a basic land from your graveyard to your hand. So this gives us a great engine with the Fire Blasts to get a basic land card into our graveyard. Now it's only a 2 of, you don't want to run too many because we don't have a lot of outs for getting basic lands into the graveyard. Another card we are using is Harrow. This is a great one. Sacrifice a land to fetch 2 lands and put them in untapped. This works great. You gotta kind of get used to it and do the math to know, I can pay 3 but then I'm getting 2. So in basically turn 3 you can Harrow and play Harvest Worm, something like that. Just interactions that you need to keep in mind. But it does allow you to sacrifice those. Another nice thing about the Harrow is the fact that you can sacrifice off a Forgotten Cave or a Tranquil Thicket that you had to play in the early game. Every once in a while you do come into that issue where you don't have enough basics, or you need red mana but you don't have a mountain, so you had to play a Forgotten Cave, as you'll see in the example game. And while it's stuck on the field, it doesn't do you any good. What you want is it to be in the graveyard so you can use these cards, the recursion, and get the card draw going again. So that's important to be able to use Harrow to sacrifice it off. Kind of another interesting engine here is the Raven's Crime. That gives us an opportunity to start chucking away lands to Harvest Worm as well. I'm a little unsold on this. This is kind of something that I pulled out from the older version and I kept, is the single copy of Raven's Crime. I understand it, but because it's 1 in 60 cards, it doesn't come up very often. Very rarely do I actually encounter the Raven's Crime, and on more thought, I might find a way to switch it out for something else. What I'm not sure of. I've toyed around with the idea of dropping Harrow down to 2 cards, getting rid of the Raven's Crime and using Edge of Autumn, something like that. But there's just it's just kind of an interesting interaction. I can see where it works and where it doesn't. Now we bring in the burn spells. I already talked about Fire Blast, and that's kind of important because you can sacrifice lands. Next we bring in is the Firebolt. It's a nice card. It's a 2 damage. The real bonus to it is the fact that it has flashback, so that you can use the ability twice, and that's kind of an important thing. This is a very kind of land. They're running 25 lands. It's a very land-heavy deck. Most of the cards revolve around drawing cards with lands, getting lands back, and not really doing anything else. So being able to flash that back is, a great thing. It adds, another. It's almost like having 8 copies of Shock in your deck. Granted, 4 of those are going to cost you 5 mana, but it really kind of helps out. Now this is kind of one of the new additions that I was talking about, is Grim Discovery, and this is kind of a perfect card for this deck. It's one of those choose one or both, return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand, and or return land card from your grave to hand, and this is great. This is your recursion engine with these 8 cards, but if you're facing an opponent with a lot of creature control, those cards are going to get killed off early, and you won't have a way to get those back. And once these are gone, that's kind of your aggro's down. That can be a bulk of your damage. It's very hindrance to the deck. So by bringing Grim Discovery, you get yourself the opportunity to bring those back, and not only do that, but you can keep bringing back the cycling lands as well. So it's a great interaction with the cartographer that I found. I have some new decks that I've seen running this actually are running copies of Faithless Looting, which I think is another great addition. Draw 2, discard 2 with flashback. I can see where it works. It gives you opportunity to discard lands, and that's great. But those decks tend to be a lot more creature light, and this is kind of something that I run, and I have not seen. I've said I've run into this deck on occasions, and while they run black, I have not seen anyone else doing this. And I think it's great. The Draggers. The Draggers cycle for 2, and most of the time you're not going to hardcast these. You really don't want to. You want them as the draw engine. Now, Grim Discovery works great with these 2. You can cycle and bring it back, cycle it again. They also work great, as that shock damage to unearth and swing that way. And it's really, I think, a great addition to this deck. Kind of brings your creature count up. If you were in an absolute state where you had to hardcast it, you could. You have the options to do that, and Grim Discovery works great with that as well. Like I said, because of the recursion you get going on. Kind of the biggest answer to this deck is going to be any kind of graveyard control, because if they empty out your graveyard with a bog or something like that, that's good game, because you're gonna need that. This is kind of a great card here. I talk about this a little bit in my article, Swirling Sandstorm. It's a 3 colorless, 1 red spell that does absolutely nothing. It does absolutely nothing unless you have Threshold, and then you can do 5 damage to each creature without flying. And this is great. I love it. I love the flavor, just whatever. This card, it's a 4-cost spell that does nothing. Unless you reach that point where you have 7 cards in your graveyard, this spell does nothing, and I love it. This card is fantastic. We have very few options available to us in Pauper for wiping the board. We have Crypt Rats, we have Echoing Decay, we have a number of things that do 2 damage. Crypt Rats can funnel out and do a lot more, but most of the stuff will do 2 or less damage to kill off creatures and wipe the board. Now Sandstorm does 5 damage or more, and that's great because that really helps you out in the affinity matchup. Where you run into a lot of creatures with the 4 toughness, the Carapace and the Mirror Enforcer, so that works. Excuse me, I'm trying not to start coughing again. I am still a little sick, but it works great to kill off all those creatures as well. Definitely the MVP, and there's a lot of ways in this deck to get your threshold up. It's a lot of fun too. I said this in the video, the playthrough that. It's a lot of fun to figure out how to reach threshold. You you can do a lot of fun things with, sacrificing the Fire Blast and the Terramorphics and cycling away cards, chump blocking with creatures, playing Harvest Worm and not returning a land to let that go to the graveyard. Just all kinds of fun stuff. So there's a lot of great interactions, and I really recommend, if you're checking this out, if you're looking at this video, do not judge this deck, do not decide whether or not to play it until you go look at the example game. I don't think I can do a quality enough job describing each individual card, but if you go check out my example game, you can see that that game has just about every interaction available to you with this deck. I drew through about a third of the excuse me, let me back up for a second. I drew through all but a third of the deck, and I hit basically every spell, got interactions with all these cards, and I really recommend, if you're looking at this video, definitely go check out the playthrough for it, because it was an epic game. Like I said, this deck can win in epic fashion, and I came back from a big deficit, and really kind of held my own with this deck once the card draw got going. So definitely go check that out. Check out the other decks in my 3-color series. Check out the article. Yep.